Order, order. We start with questions. Secretary of State for Defence, Rebecca Smith.
Question number 2, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you. Mr Speaker, neither Albion or Bulwark were due to go to sea ahead of their out-of-service dates in 2033 and 2034. The Royal Navy is exploring options to sell both HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark in a government-to-government sale. Several potential customers have shown interest, but no final decisions have been made.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given the fact that these ships, HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark, are reportedly being sold to another navy for a figure that could well undervalue previous spends on refit and maintenance, how does the Minister justify the economic impact of their sale on Plymouth and Devonport Dockyard, let alone the reduction in amphibious capability in the Navy, when the promised multi-role support ships are at least half a decade away from service?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I don't recognise any of the figures that have been bandied around in the newspapers, and so it would not be accurate to take them as anything other than speculation. The disposal shows that we're delivering for defence by divesting old capabilities to make way for the future, as the First Sea Lord, Admiral Sir Ben Keyes, put it. Effectively, these ships were mothballed by the previous government, so I'm not going to take any lessons from that side of the House about how to deal with these matters.
John Long.
Question number 3, please, Mr Speaker.
So state.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'd like to answer question 3 and 12 together. The government was elected with a firm commitment to set a path to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. The Prime Minister has said we will do so in spring.
So that my constituents can better understand the government's priorities, which does the Minister think we will achieve first? A deal to lease Diego Garcia for billions of pounds, or spending 2.5% on defence?
Good question.
So state.
Mr Speaker, everyone agrees we must increase defence spending to meet the increasing threats. And this is a government that is delivering for defence by increasing defence spending. And we've already increased defence spending by almost £3 billion next year.
Aphra Brandreth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's clear that we're facing increasingly volatile and dangerous global security challenges, which is why the previous government set a path to 2.5% of GDP being spent on defence by 2030. Can the Minister share with the House what conversations he and the MOD have had with NATO counterparts, particularly the US, on increasing defence spending, and what implications does he think his party's lack of timeline to reach 2.5% will have on the special relationship given the new US administration?
Very good.
Well, Mr Speaker, this is a country that's at the forefront of defence spending within NATO. We're ready to increase it to 2.5% of GDP. She talks about the previous government's plan for 2.5%. I have to tell her it was an election gimmick announced 4 weeks before the Prime Minister then called the election, which the Institute for Fiscal Studies described as misleading and the Institute for Government described as a work of fiction.
Shaun Davies.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This Labour government has given the biggest pay rise to our armed services for almost 20 years. Speaking to service personnel in my own constituency and also as part of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, they talk about pay, but they also talk about service conditions and support for their family as a key driver for retention. What is the government doing in this regard?
So state.
Well, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is right. We've been able to, and I'm proud to have been the Defence Secretary that's been able this year to have given the Armed Forces the largest pay rise for over 20 years. I'm proud to have been able to do the deal that has seen 36,000 Army and Forces family homes being brought back into public control so that we can now develop them and for the future. And this is a government that will reset the nation's contract with those who serve and the families who support them.
Will Stone.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In my time in the Army, I saw firsthand the blokes not getting the kit and equipment that they needed to operate efficiently. It angered me this weekend to read that the previous administration wasted £5 million on McLaren mudflaps. Will the Secretary of State promise me that he will not take...
Order. Secretary of State, you're coming in on 2 questions. I've not called you yet. You don't need you. Come on, Will Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To return back to my question, it angered me to see the previous administration waste £5 million when blokes like myself did not have the kit and equipment they needed to operate. That is a fact. Will the Secretary of State promise me that he will put the service personnel and our nation's security...
Order. I think you need an adjournment debate. Come on, Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend that speaks from experience in the Rifles, he's completely right, of course. It's not just how much you spend, but it's how you spend it. And this is a government now delivering for defence by getting a grip of defence budgets, tackling MOD waste and investing in the kit that our frontline service people need. We scrapped the £40 million VIP helicopter deal. We've ended the pointless racing car sponsorship, and we've saved £300 million from an out-of-control consultancy spend.
Jeremy Hill.
When the UK persuaded NATO to spend 2% of GDP on defence in 2014, just 2 other countries did. Now it is 23 countries. Does the Secretary of State agree that once again it is time for the UK to play a leadership role in Europe by persuading NATO to spend the money it should and keep America part of the alliance?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I do indeed. It is time for the UK and European allies to step up, to do more of the heavy lifting. That includes increasing defence spending to meet the threats that we face. It includes, as I've discussed with the new Defence Secretary in the US, boosting also our defence industry on both sides of the Atlantic.
Johanna Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of the growing nature of the threats facing our United Kingdom, it was genuinely shocking to read at the weekend the Conservative Defence Minister spent taxpayers' money sponsoring a race car. My constituents in Paisley and Renfrewshire South are absolutely livid about the waste of their taxpayers' money. Can the Secretary of State reassure my constituents that he will continue his action to root out wasteful spending in every aspect of the MOD?
Secretary of State.
I can indeed, Mr. Speaker. We have to get a grip of out-of-control defence waste, out-of-control defence budgets, and I'm pleased to have been able now to put an end to that pointless racing car deal. It delivered free race day tickets, MOD-sponsored branded mudflaps, instead of the kit that our frontline troops need. And of course the Minister responsible for that deal was the Shadow Defence Secretary. He agreed the contract. He told this House it was a brilliant partnership.
Shadow Secretary of State, James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, this being defence, you will know, sir, the importance of secure communication. So before I put on record my question, can I say whether we should be grateful or concerned that prior to defence orals, my MPs were sent all of the Ministry of Defence's answers to our oral questions in advance. So we've been forewarned.
Themselves, you've shocked me.
I thought it'd be to the benefit of the House, Mr. Speaker, given the importance of secure communication. But turning to the question, Mr. Speaker, which involves secure communications, it does say everything about this government's priorities, that they are delaying increasing defence spending to 2.5%, but accelerating their terrible Chagos deal at a cost of up to £18 billion. Now, last week, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister justified his Chagos deal by stating that without it, and I quote, the base cannot operate in practical terms as it should, and that Number 10 later briefed that this was referring to satellite links. So is the Secretary of State seriously suggesting that there is currently an operational threat to the US and UK military satellite communications at Diego Garcia?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, this is a question about defence spending. We have a cast-iron commitment to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, a level the UK has not spent on defence since 2010 with the last Labour government. And on the Chagos deal that he asked me about, this is a military base that is vital to our national security. The Prime Minister was right to say that its legal certainty had been called into doubt. That is bad for our national security, and it's a gift to our adversaries. That's why we looked for a deal that would safeguard the operations for at least the next century.
James Cock.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said that the base cannot operate. He was referring to operations. That implies there must be some kind of direct threat to satellite communications on Diego Garcia. Now, the world will have seen the Secretary of State has not defended that position. He's not leading into it in any way, which makes us think as follows. Given that the former Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, the previous Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, saw the same intelligence and rejected that deal, and that since then it's got worse and more expensive, isn't the obvious thing to do to scrap it and spend every penny saved on our armed forces?
Secretary of State.
Well, his colleagues, of course, were responsible for 11 rounds of negotiations about this deal. And the Prime Minister's point was that without long-term legal certainty, it cast into doubt the operational security of that base. And this is a deal that will secure that operational guarantee for at least a century.
Bradley Thomas.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to answer questions 4, 18 and 23 together. This government is delivering for defence with strong measures to protect our underwater critical national infrastructure. We've declassified the activities of the Russian spy ship Yantar. We've called out their activities by saying we see you, we know what you're doing, and we'll robustly defend our critical national infrastructure.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State agrees that the threat to critical undersea infrastructure is serious. So will he prioritise development of underwater capabilities, such as uncrewed systems, including Pillar 2 of AUKUS, and will he increase research and development investment into systems that could protect this critical undersea infrastructure?
Well, I'm grateful for his question. It's a good one. We are seeing more risks to our critical underwater infrastructure by players that do wish harm to our national security. We have a brilliant capability in RFA Proteus already that is able to support our infrastructure and those of our allies as well. And when the Street Defence Review is published in the spring, I'm sure there'll be more developments in that direction.
Eric Cross.
The Secretary of State recently came to this House to outline the serious situation with the Yantar, and it is a clear example of the threat that is posed to our crucial and critical undersea infrastructure and the work that we need to defend and deter any potential attacks. But with this in mind, does it not just show why we need to increase our defence spending as quickly as possible in order to defend our crucial infrastructure and protect national security?
I'm grateful for that question, and she is right. We are increasing our defence spending. In the budget, we increased defence spending by £3 billion, and in the spring, we'll be setting out a path after the publication of the Strategic Defence Review to spend 2.5% of our GDP on defence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our undersea cables are critical to the economy, public services and the functioning of social order in this country. Given hostile activity surveilling our cables, can ministers give assurances that the full needs of our Navy will be reflected in the Strategic Defence Review so that we can defend our homeland security?
Minister.
Well, can I thank the honourable member for his question? And as a Navy brat myself, Mr. Speaker, and someone who represents a naval constituency, it is something that's the foremost of my mind. But let me say it's not just the Royal Navy that defends our critical national infrastructure. In the case of the Yantar, it was the RAF, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary and the Royal Navy, as well as a joint integrated operation of all our forces working together to defend our interests. And anyone threatening our infrastructure should be in no doubt that the UK possesses formidable capabilities to defend it, and we will.
Shaun Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I had the privilege of visiting HMNB Clyde with a number of my colleagues from across the House. So can I ask the Secretary of State to reassure the House that he's working with the Scottish Government to help address the capacity and retention issues at the base, and can he reassure us that the Scottish Government is engaging positively on the industrial defence strategy?
Minister.
Well, Clyde's a really important base for our national security. It's one of our critical pieces of military asset, and it is something that we work very closely, not just with the Scottish Government and local councils on, but across the entirety of governments, because the success of our defence relies not just on the actions and decisions of the Ministry of Defence. It is a whole-of-government approach that keeps our nation safe. And in these more difficult times, we'll be asking for more on a whole-of-government approach to make sure that the men and women of our fighting forces and the civilians that support them have what they need to keep our nation safe.
Donna Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The proposed Aquin interconnector between France and England will slice through my constituency of Fareham and Waterlooville, causing huge disruption. But of more significant concern are the fact that the Ministry of Defence has raised serious national security concerns about the proposed submarine power cable. Does the Secretary of State or the Minister agree that we can't do anything to jeopardise our national security, and will he formally lodge an objection to the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change as he considers this proposal?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful for the question. I'm also familiar with some of the campaigning work of the member for Portsmouth South on this side, who's raised, I think, similar concerns as the Right Honourable Lady has here as well. I'm happy if she was able to write to me to be able to look at that and to meet her to discuss further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the strength of the response on protecting our undersea infrastructure. The Defence Secretary has been clear that growing Russian aggression isn't going to be tolerated here or in Ukraine. Can the Minister confirm that Homeland Security will be a key focus of the Strategic Defence Review?
Well, I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's question. He's absolutely right. We live in more difficult and uncertain times with increasing risks to UK homeland security as well. That is an evolution from some of the strategic assessments that were carried out in previous reviews. It's for that reason that the Strategic Defence Review is not only looking at how we support our NATO allies with a NATO-first approach, but how we invest in capabilities to make sure that we are looking at the UK homeland. And, Mr. Speaker, the UK homeland includes our overseas territories as well.
We've stretched it well, haven't we? So let's go to Tom Tugendhat.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer question 5 and 10 together. And I'd like to thank the honourable member for what is a really important question. You have my absolute assurance that if anyone dies in service, from training all the way through to combat and operations, they will absolutely be exempt from inheritance tax provisions. And I will continue to discuss this issue with my opposite number in the Treasury, as well as many other issues to do with armed forces pay. From our perspective, this government is deeply proud of the armed forces. I'm deeply proud of them, and they'll have my full backing as we move forward.
Tom Tugendhat.
May I first of all place on record my full congratulations to the honourable and gallant member for his recent award of the New Year's honours. It was a fantastic achievement for somebody with whom I have the greatest admiration, and we've served together in numerous fields in the past. May I, however, raise with him the problem with his answer, which is that the retention of the armed forces is already suffering. We're already seeing numbers coming down, and we're already seeing people struggling to make the maths add up between serving today and having a future tomorrow. The problem with these arguments, and the problem with the lack of clarity that we've seen from the benches opposite, is that there are too many people who are making decisions that all of us need them to think again on. We need people to serve, we need people to stay, and his role and his responsibility is to keep them there.
Yeah. I'd like to thank the honourable and gallant member for his response. What I would say is we need to take a holistic view at this. And I would like to remind the honourable member that we've missed every recruitment and retention target for the last 14 years. We're working really hard to get after it now. We've just put in place wraparound welfare. We've done the Annington's Homes deal. We're additional resources into veterans' homes for after service, and we've given a 20-year pay rise. We're working on this really hard. We're in discussions with our Treasury counterparts, and we will move this forward.
Blake Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister take this opportunity to provide assurances that the proposed changes to the application of inheritance tax on certain armed forces death in service payments are compatible with commitments in the Armed Forces Covenant? That is to ensure our brave and loyal armed forces personnel, and I quote, face no disadvantage compared to other citizens in the provision of public and commercial services. Yes or no?
So I would say to the honourable members, the Covenant will come into law. It will come into law in the back of the Armed Forces Bill in the next 2 years or so, and that will result in a great expansion across all the government departments to fall in line with that Covenant and ensure that no individual who is served is disadvantaged because of that service.
Sir Minister Mark Fons.
Thank you, sir. Well, the Forces Pension Society has already stated that potentially levying inheritance tax on death in service benefits would be wholly counter to the Armed Forces Covenant. And on these benches, we wholly agree. The HMRC consultation on this proposal closed on the 22nd of January. So can the Minister please tell us on what day the MOD submitted its response to this key consultation, presumably in defence of service families' interests, and if he will place a copy of the MOD's response in the library of the House.
May I remind the honourable member of my service and the fact that in no way, shape or form will I take this for granted. I am putting all of the effort in the moment, discussion. My officials have discussed with the Treasury, I have discussed with the Treasury, and will continue to discuss issues like this with the Treasury to ensure that our armed forces personnel get the deal they deserve.
Well, I commend the Minister on his DSO, as we all do. But in a PQ, we were told the Ministry of Defence has not made a formal response to HM Revenue and Customs' technical consultation.
Why not?
They really, really should have done. Who in their right mind would soldier for a government which doesn't have their back, whether it's school fees, lawfare or inheritance tax, or worse, doesn't have the back of their families if they die unmarried and in service?
Scoring political points in the back of the armed forces families is unacceptable. This is a public consultation, and it's not the government's responsibility to answer to that. We have discussed department to department, both from an official's perspective and a ministerial perspective, and we will continue to do so, and we will bring this to a close.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Question 6, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I held the first call with the new US Secretary for Defence, Pete Hegseth, last month. We discussed the importance of all NATO allies doing more, including on defence spending. I look forward to meeting Secretary Hegseth this week at NATO Defence Ministers.
Wendy Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of this House have raised concerns regarding the impact of both the new US administration and the continuing Russian aggression in relation to Ukraine. Can the Secretary of State assure me that he will be using the upcoming Munich Security Conference to determine with allies the best way of ensuring Ukraine's victory?
I can indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the fact, and I think she will do, that the new US Defence Secretary is spending his third full week in office in Europe. He's made clear that he wants to discuss how to strengthen alliances, how to expand our defence industries on both sides of the Atlantic, and how to boost allied defence spending, including on Ukraine, which is what we all agree.
Chris MacDonald, you are standing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome that answer from the Secretary of State. And in the face of wider Russian aggression, I wonder if he could expand a bit more on what conversations he's already had with his counterparts in NATO around how NATO can respond appropriately to the threat from Russia.
I can indeed, Mr. Speaker. Everyone in NATO and every one of the European allies within NATO are ready and are stepping up on Euro-Atlantic security. I will have the privilege on Wednesday this week of chairing the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, a 50-nation strong group in which we coordinate the support that Ukraine needs, because we must stay with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Number 7.
Mr. Speaker, the government has committed to maintain £3 billion in military aid to Ukraine this year, next year, and each year for as long as it takes.
Mr. Speaker, I came back from Ukraine a week and a half ago, and I was very close to the front, talked to many of the military commanders there, and they made it very clear to me that they were desperately short of artillery pieces, 155mm, and most importantly munitions, where they could hardly respond back to the Russians. And as I understand it, also cram defence missiles, which are desperately needed to protect their energy sites and their civilian flats and houses. Now, I know this hardware has been promised by many European nations and, of course, the USA. So the issue really here, and I must say, Mr. Speaker, when you're up near that close to them, you realise how desperate it is there. So in the light of this delay, will the government commit the UK, at least as far as humanly possible, to provide the sort of weaponry that they can to help alleviate that problem, but also mostly by pushing our allies to do what they promised to do because what I heard, without that, they're running the risk of losing this war.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the fact the Right Honourable Gentleman went to Ukraine, was there, I know, with my honourable friend from Macclesfield, and I look forward to meeting them both to discuss the detail of what they saw later this month. Can I say that from the second day in this job, when I was in Odessa with President Zelensky, I made the commitment that the UK would step up support for Ukraine and speed up support for Ukraine, which is exactly what we've done. That will be part of the discussions that we have with other nations at the meeting that I will chair on Wednesday, and I'm sure it will also be part of the discussions that we have at NATO on Thursday as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, along with others across the House, welcome this £3 billion commitment to Ukraine this year, next year and the year after. But there are things we can do at home as well, Mr. Speaker. For example, this weekend I hope to host a reception for Ukraine refugees in my own constituency, a Valentine's for Ukraine that we can send from all of us to all of them and all of the Ukrainians who are finding refuge in our country just now.
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to my old friend and the action that he's taken in his constituency? The UK has a proud unity on Ukraine, a proud welcome for Ukrainians under the Homes for Ukraine since day one of Putin's illegal full-scale invasion. And as my honourable friend says, nearly 3 years now into this conflict, and certainly on Valentine's Day, it's a useful marker to recognise that warmth of welcome from the UK people, and also the struggle and the fight that the Ukrainian people, both military and civilian alike, are waging for their freedom and their future.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to answer 8, 20 and 24 together. This government is delivering for defence by addressing the deep retention and recruitment crisis we inherited from the Conservatives. Last week, I announced more detail on a brand new fast-track cyber entry to boost UK cyber defence, bolstering our capabilities in response to these growing threats and address a global shortage of cyber talent. I also announced the award of a new contract for the new Tri-Service Armed Forces Recruiting Service.
David Turner. Westarts College in my constituency offers a great selection of courses, including computer courses that offer a pathway to a career in cybersecurity. For young people in Hemel Hempstead considering a career in that field and defending our country in that way, can the Minister outline further details of the steps we took last week to boost recruitment to cybersecurity in this country?
Well, I'm grateful for his question and for the enthusiasm of the young people in his constituency for a career in cyber. Last week, the new direct entry cyber pathway for our armed forces was opened for the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy. The Army entry will come online next year. This allows people to join directly to pursue a career in cyber by changing the entry requirements to bring on board that cyber expertise that we need to help keep our country safe. The future front line is not tomorrow, it is today. It's the cyber front line, and young people right across the nation should be looking on the Royal Navy, the RAF website, as a career in cyber. It is well paid and it keeps our country safe.
Peter Swallow.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the news that the MOD has signed the British Dyslexia Association's Dyslexia-Friendly Workplace Pledge? Does the Minister agree with me that in order to address the recruitment crisis, it's vital that the armed forces continue to remain inclusive to recruits from all backgrounds and with all experiences, while rightly continuing to demand high standards?
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to confirm that the Ministry of Defence signed the Dyslexia-Friendly Workplace Pledge at the end of last year, making us, I think, Mr. Speaker, the first UK government department to do so. This is a fantastic step forward that signals the MOD as a top employer for people with dyslexia. Whatever someone's ability, there is a role for them within our armed forces, because our armed forces need people with a whole range of abilities, backgrounds and expertise to keep our nation safe.
Sir Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my Tamworth constituency, we are proud to host the Defence Medical Services at Whittington. We're looking forward to a fresh date being set for the Minister's visit for veterans and people, so he can see for himself the brilliant work that they do. Can I ask what steps the Minister is taking to build on the success of centres of excellence like this in any new recruitment programmes?
Well, thank the Honourable Lady for her question. It's absolutely vital that we seek to invest in defence medical services, especially as we live in more difficult and contested times where we may be needing to use the expertise of not only defence medical services but our National Health Service right across the UK to support a war-fighting effort. I know the Minister for Veterans and People is looking forward to visiting Whittington later this year, and I hope that when the Strategic Defence Review comes out, she'll be able to see the path to investment and support that we're offering defence medical services as we look towards creating a whole-of-society approach to our defence.
So David Davies.
Mr. Speaker, soldiers will be leaving the army, not being recruited, if we continue to allow the persecution of soldiers who served in Northern Ireland. Last week's coroner's report into the Coal Island shootings was 51 pages of fact and 8 pages of naive speculation, which led right into the IRA's attempt to rewrite the history of Northern Ireland. So I'd like to hear from the Secretary of State how, without the Northern Ireland legacy legislation, he's going to prevent this. If he fails, what should be a process of peace and reconciliation will turn into a vindictive, vengeful pursuit of men whose only sin was to serve their country with honour, heroism, skill, and in the most terrifying conditions. And if we can't, then all the recruiting efforts will fail.
Can I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question, and I can assure him that his passion is felt on these benches as well. As a ministerial team, we want to support all our veterans, and the issue that he raised is difficult for me to comment on as it's subject to ongoing legal matters, and he'll appreciate it's hard for a government minister to comment in such circumstances. But let me reassure him...
Order. Just to reassure the Minister, there is no legal restrictions on it. Okay, it's not the courts. It's only a coroner, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for that question nonetheless. The Ministry of Defence is continuing our conversations with the Northern Ireland Office. That is, of course, the lead department when it comes to matters of this regard. But we will continue to support our veterans and continue the conversations with the Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner as to how we can support veterans in Northern Ireland in particular.
Jim McAllister.
Thank you. Following on that, does the Minister accept that recruitment is bound to be disincentivised by a finding 30 years on that people who did their duty, who encountered armed IRA terrorists on murderous active service and protected the public as a consequence, if they then find themselves 30 years later vilified by the coroner's service? How can that be right? And what steps will this government take to protect our armed forces, not just now, but going into the future, including what happened in the past?
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's question in relation to this. It is a matter that this department has discussed today with the Northern Ireland Office. It is a Northern Ireland Office lead, so it is an area where we'll be working with them closely on that. There's announcements that have already been made by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland in relation to this, but let me reassure him that a career in the armed forces is a brilliant career for anyone looking at it, and this government will continue to support those people who serve and those people who have served to make sure they get all the support they need to be able to defend our country in service and to benefit from that service after they've left uniform.
Shaun.
Mr. Speaker, and further to the points made by right honourable and honourable members, if we're going to have recruitment, then we need to have protection. If we're going to have protection, then we want to make sure that the disgraceful scenes of this week where SAS killed 4 IRA men returning from a bombing and a shooting attack in a police station trying to kill, when they were confronted by those killers, murderers, terrorists, scum that they are, armed to the teeth with a machine gun that could fire 500 rounds per minute and AK-47, is it not right that our soldiers should be protected? They were confronted by the enemy. Then enemy were never going to surrender, and they got their just desserts.
Well, thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I can reassure him that we share the same passion on these benches that all veterans get the support that they need. It is an aspect that we'll be continuing to discuss with our Northern Ireland Office colleagues who take the lead on this matter, but I'd like to encourage him to continue to raise questions, because it is important that we support all our veterans, no matter where they served across the United Kingdom, and that is a matter that the Secretary of State and myself, as well as the Minister of Veterans, will continue to discuss with colleagues across government.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we want to strengthen our armed forces, we must fix the recruitment delays. Now, one young recruit that I know, Jimmy, he applied in September 2023 but won't start until January 2025. And this is largely due to medical record hold-ups and poor communication. Now, I welcome the aim for applicants to receive a decision within 10 days and a training start date within 30 days, but how will Serco deliver this in practice? And what safeguards will be in place to ensure that recruits get clear, timely responses and aren't lost in the system? Thank you.
Well, the Honourable Lady is exactly right that we do need to speed up the recruitment process. We inherited a situation, Mr Speaker, where it takes on average over 250 days from the point of application to turning up at your training establishment, often without any understanding about how long that will take. That's why the Secretary of State's introduced the 10-30 policy, and a provisional offer within 10 days of starting, a provisional start date within 30 days of application, and we are doing that to reduce the time of flight, including working cross-government to improve the speed of access to medical records. There'll be further announcements in due course, but we are making progress on that, but there's a lot more to do to fix the damage of the recruitment process run by the last government.
Best checked. Question number 9, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Afghan resettlement programme is a cross-government delivery programme which will bring existing resettlement schemes into one single pipeline. Under such schemes, over 30,000 eligible Afghans have relocated to the UK. As confirmed in my recent written parliamentary answer to the Honourable Gentleman, it's not possible to provide a breakdown of relocation figures by job role, including those who work directly for British forces.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Having admitted 30,000 Afghans into the country as part of the Afghan resettlement programme, it is concerning to learn that the Ministry of Defence has no idea how many of those 30,000 actually ever work for British forces. The government's own figures estimate that the total number of local Afghans employed by British forces during Op Herrick to be around 7,000, only 2,850 of which worked as interpreters and translators on the front line, a fraction of the 30,000. If the MOD doesn't know why they're eligible to be let into the country, the MOD presumably also doesn't know who they are or what they've been doing in Afghanistan over the last decade. So can the Minister confirm that the Afghan resettlement programme hasn't been exploited by criminal, terrorist or hostile state influence?
Well, can I thank him not just for that question, but for his ongoing interest in this area? Those people who served alongside our forces in Afghanistan, we owe them a debt of gratitude, a programme started by the last government and one that this government is proud to continue. Everyone who is brought to the UK to safety from the Taliban under the Afghan schemes has been vetted in relation to that. There's a variety of roles that cover support to our armed forces in relation to our UK mission in Afghanistan, but I can reassure him that this is an area that I pay close attention to, and if he would like to meet to discuss this further, to deepen his interest and to be able to help him in his inquiries, I'm very happy doing so.
Dr L. Pinkerton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 11.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So why do we support more diverse military? Well, it's really simple. It makes us better, it makes us think differently, and importantly, it represents a society that we're trying to protect. And since coming into government, we've launched our Raising the Standards programme. We're seeking to make defence the most attractive employer for all walks of society. What I would say, Mr Speaker, and I'll be unequivocally clear, is that the underlying principle as to why we pursue a more diverse military, why we pursue better welfare, why we pursue better housing, why we pursue better kit and equipment, is quite simply to ensure that we call upon our men and women to do their job, they can close with the enemy and win.
Phil Pinkerton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2019, the Wigston Review identified that serving personnel from ethnic minority backgrounds are subject to higher levels of harassment and bullying than their white British counterparts. Given the recent success of the Atherton Review that has cast light on the structural challenges faced by women in the armed forces, and also given now that the British Army has 16% of its workforce coming from ethnic minority groups, I wonder if the ministerial team think it might be time to have an Atherton-style review independent of the MOD into the challenges faced by ethnic minority groups in order to ensure and enhance recruitment, retention and promotional opportunities. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for useful comments. What I would say is we've launched our Raising Our Standards programme to take the standards from where they were to increase them, to make defence the most inclusive and indeed the most rewarding for any parts of society to join. HCDC will obviously hold us to account on some of that, and also when the covenant comes into place we'll also cover certain elements of it as well. So thank you for the question.
Helen Maguire, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Recent weeks have seen troubling headlines for the LGBT personnel, and we on these benches believe that everyone is welcome in our armed forces, regardless of their sexual orientation, ethnicity or gender identity. Can the Minister outline what steps have been taken to promote the British values of inclusion, particularly for the LGBT community among our NATO allies? And will the Minister provide an update on the compensation scheme for LGBT veterans who were impacted by the military's anti-gay ban?
So I'd like to thank the honourable member. When we started the Etherton review, there was a lot of engagement that went out across some of our NATO allies to take best practice. And now that we've launched it, we're also making sure people can understand the successes and perhaps some of the improvements as that programme progresses. As you'll know, the Defence Secretary on the 12th of December announced our findings of the Etherton review with a 50% increase on the financial redress system to those affected by the LGBT ban. And that's now heading in the right direction, with over 500 people starting the application process.
Question 13, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The new medium helicopter competition is currently at the evaluation and approval stage, and subject to everything going well, I would anticipate a contract award later this year, subject to all the usual approvals.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for their statement. A significant number of my constituents contribute to the defence sector, whether through apprenticeships, graduate roles or skilled employment. Many are schooled in West Dorset and now work in the surrounding areas, including firms like Leonardo in my neighbouring constituency of Yeovil. What assurances can the Minister give that contracts like the new medium helicopter are awarded quickly so that the futures of the many apprentices, try saying that, and employees in the defence sector are protected?
Well, the honourable gentleman is right. Some of these programmes can take a long time to get to contract. In fact, this programme experienced delays in securing outline business case approval under the previous government. I'm hoping that we can get it to the end of the line as swiftly as possible in accordance with the current process, and hopefully that some of his constituents will benefit from having work to do on that new programme.
Question number 14, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We inherited a retention and recruitment crisis, and that means addressing it across all different cohorts. Increasing female representation benefits our warfighting and readiness, but we still have some way to go from where she and I would like this to be. Latest figures from October 24 show 11.9% female representation in the regular forces and 15.9%, Mr. Speaker, in the reserves.
Mr. Speaker, a balanced workforce in the armed forces is good for British defence, but women still face a raft of challenges, making it harder to attract and retain female talent. So what steps is the Minister taking to accelerate progress towards the Women in Defence Charter ambition of 30%? And could he outline the steps he is taking to make the armed forces a better workplace for women?
Well, thank you for a question. It's a really important topic and one that really does matter. Implementing the recommendations of the Atherton Review, raising the standards, as the Minister for Veterans and People has spoken about, will benefit everyone in the armed forces, but in particular women. We need to improve culture and behaviour and focus on women's health and well-being, with new policies being brought forward to be able to address that. And we're also standing up more work on calling out crimes and behaviour that is unacceptable in our armed forces. Because, Mr. Speaker, everyone should have a place in our armed forces, because defending our country is a whole of society approach where we need to not neglect any part of society.
Question number 15, Mr. Speaker.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question and reassure her that I work closely with my Northern Ireland, Welsh and Scottish commissioners. We're currently looking at the structures, how we support veterans across the whole tapestry of the United Kingdom, and we really want to put in place an institutional resilient system that gives the best care at the right time in the right place to the right people. And that's primarily working with thousands of charities collaboratively and coherently to ensure we can get best bang for buck from all of the amazing volunteers and charitable services out there. So there's a bigger review going on. It's on hold at the moment, and we'll let you know more in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud that in my constituency of South Northamptonshire, that hosts the largest armed force gathering of its kind in the UK. The National Transition event at Silverstone on the 24th of February, now in its 6th year, is run by charities Mission Motorsport and Mission Community, recognising, demonstrating and celebrating the value of our veterans and armed forces community. As the Secretary of State develops a veterans strategy, are community-led approaches such as this part of the Department's thinking, and how might we support organisations such as these in their work?
Absolutely, and I just travelled to the northeast of England and hit 3 different councils looking at different ways in which they deal with the veterans issue. I'm really looking forward to the launch events, which will have a variety of different race cars. I just hope I don't get to see the mud flaps when I'm there.
Right, let us move on to topicals. Graham.
Number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of us all, can I wish good luck to our UK team in Canada for the Invictus Games. This week I'll have the privilege of chairing the 50-nation Ukraine Defence Contact Group. I'll also attend the meeting of NATO Defence Ministers, then the Munich Security Conference. 2025, Mr. Speaker, is the critical year for the war in Ukraine. The world is watching, and it is imperative that all allies now step up their support. I'm proud of the UK's continued unity and leadership on Ukraine, and this year the UK will be providing £4.5 billion in military aid, more than ever before. Mr. Speaker, our commitment is absolute. We will strengthen Ukraine on the battlefield and at any negotiating table. I'm grateful, and I know I continue to have the support of all sides of this House. Together we will stand with the people of Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Mr. Speaker, US Navy officials have reported increased Russian and Chinese patrols in the High North. Last week, the Danish Navy announced plans to acquire 3 new Arctic patrol ships, and March will see one of the largest exercised joint Viking operations in NATO's history. With these concerns in mind, can the Secretary of State confirm which UK assets will be involved in joint Viking this year, and what plans he has to update the 2022 policy paper on the UK's defence contribution in the High North?
My honourable friend is right about the High North. We will continue to maintain a strong defence profile and posture, and for the exercise Joint Viking, both the Royal Navy and the Royal Fleet Auxiliary will be taking part.
Shadow Secretary of State James Cartlidge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And surely one of the most important lessons from the war in Ukraine for our own military base is the urgent need to fire up the defence industry and increase its capacity. Yet today, Mr. Speaker, we learned from ADS that British defence manufacturers will be hit with a £600 million tax rise this Parliament from higher national insurance. Why are they prioritising higher taxes on defence instead of higher defence spending?
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we're backing British industry. We're looking for our firms that can design, invent and make in Britain. A big change from the industrial policy we saw under the previous government. It was why I was in Derby recently, able to announce a 8-year contract for Rolls-Royce that will support over 1,000 apprentices, 200 apprentices each year, and thousands of small businesses in supply chains across the country.
James Cartlidge.
I know all about the unity deal because, as the Honourable Lady, the Defence Procurement Minister, said, I negotiated it, Mr. Speaker. But extraordinary complacency on tax from the Secretary of State. Mr. Speaker, they're not just taxing the defence industry, they're taxing defence people's children and their education. They're taxing death in service payments. The fact is the defence sector is under attack from all sides, Mr. Speaker. The question is this how they're going to pay for their Chagos deal?
Mr. Speaker, for the Rolls-Royce contract, we stepped up and accelerated the negotiations to conclude that deal, and I was able to announce it the other week in Rolls-Royce to the apprentices and to the management there. We are a government that is putting nearly £3 billion this year extra into defence, that recognises, as everybody does, that we must increase defence spending, and we will return UK defence spending, including directing it first and foremost to our British industry, to a level we have not seen in this country since Labour was last in government in 2010.
Laura Kirksmith.
Mr. Speaker, this week is National Apprenticeships Week, and I know from my constituents in Aylesbury that these are a vital and successful route into the workplace. Will the Secretary of State join me in welcoming the 26,000 apprenticeships in the defence sector across the country, and will he continue to build the right skills and workforce of the future through apprenticeships?
Well, I'm very happy to acknowledge my honourable friend's point, and I met many apprentices at the launch of National Apprenticeships Week late last week, and wherever I go, to whichever factory I go, I meet apprentices, young men, young women, thrilled by the opportunities that a career in defence gives them. They've all got smiles on their faces. They've all got futures in front of them. And that's one of the great things about National Apprenticeship Week. It highlights all of that.
Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On continuity of education allowances, we pressed the government to extend to 100% for service families, and we were told that there would be no exemptions from the depredations of the decision to impose VAT on school fees. Now it turns out that the children of American servicemen and women are exempt from these charges. Wouldn't the fairest thing be to extend it to the men and women who serve our country?
Yeah.
So there's a long-standing deal with many other nations that we have with, to do with welfare, families, etc. What I would say is this government is absolutely supporting our armed forces community. We're going to pay 90% of those CEA. We've given them the biggest pay rise, and we're addressing the recruitment and retention crisis that we've been left with.
Adam Jogi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is proud of the men and women who work in our defence industries, and rightly so. So I wonder whether the Secretary of State will join me in encouraging excellent universities like Healey University in Newcastle-under-Lyme to work with our defence sector to create good jobs for local people, to boost skills and safeguard our national security.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to join with him in making those points. And he's right that we must fully support defence companies and their personnel, and we must make sure that universities like Keele and all the other further and higher education sectors welcome defence firms at their careers fairs.
Dave Dougal.
Mr. Speaker, does the Secretary of State, his officials and his chiefs have a plan to implement the additional resource from 2.5% of GDP when it arrives? Because if they don't, we'll be faced with lengthy delays while procurement plans are put in place. So is it a case of ministerial prevarication on this, or is there a serious plan? Because if 2.5% arrives and it takes so long, we'll actually be no further forward than we were at 2% if there's not plans ready to hit the ground with procurement.
Mr. Speaker, we have the commitment, we have the plan.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Veterans Minister for recently visiting Redditch for a round table. At that round table, he heard from veterans about the excellent work by the Redditch Armed Forces and Veterans Breakfast Club in bringing the community together and signposting critical support. Would he agree with me that it's vital that government continues to work with such organisations to ensure that no veteran misses out in the support that they deserve?
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for that point. And the visit to Redditch was truly enlightening. The veterans there, the charitable sector there, were doing an amazing job to support veterans with his constituency. And I fully champion the breakfast clubs that they were pulling forward.
Clive James.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom has a strong defence industry worth £36 billion in exports, important to companies in my constituency, Wokingham, like Collins Aerospace, Momentum and Chess Dynamics. The government's commitment to strengthening UK-EU relations is especially welcome in this sector. What steps is the department taking to boost exports with our EU and NATO allies?
Mr. Speaker, we are setting out to reset relations with key European allies. We've said that we will look to cooperate more closely with the European Union where it's in British interests and we can add to the defence and security arrangements for Europe as a whole. We have struck some important deep bilateral new agreements like the Trinity House agreement with Germany, and we have to see our British industry not just as producing the kit that our forces need, but as an essential part of our deterrence alongside allies that deters aggression.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, I hosted the annual dinner for former service people in my constituency and met scores of people who served our country proudly and bravely, like Councillor Clive Morgan. So can I ask the Secretary of State the question that they asked me, which is becoming ever more urgent by the day? What is the government doing to boost the resilience of the general public in this country in an ever more hostile world?
I think national resilience in defence and depth is absolutely essential as we move forward when the threat is transferred from non-state actors to those state actors across the globe. And as the SDR comes out in the next couple of months in the spring, you'll see that as a central tenet throughout.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week in Popera, the Gurkha class of 2025 proudly attested. And yet, there is one part of the British Armed Forces that doesn't yet have women, and that is the Brigade of Gurkhas. will ministers do what, sadly, and not for want of trying, I failed to do, and that is to ensure that that omission is rectified?
So I've served with the Gurkhas on various tours in Afghanistan and across the world. They are some of the best forces that we have, and they do a fantastic job upholding the very freedoms we enjoy. I will continue to work with the Gurkhas, and I'm looking forward to meeting their ambassador here very soon to discuss issues such as this.
Sam Blashworth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Government for improving the pay and housing conditions of our armed forces. The area that I represent in Bishop Auckland has turned out some excellent young men and women into the armed forces, and many of them have first of all been through our brilliant volunteer-led cadet forces. Without wishing to preempt the Strategic Defence Review, will they commit to ensuring that there is strong funding for our local cadets?
So I'd like to thank the Honourable Member. We just talked about resilience and defence in depth. The cadets provide an example of where we can bring society and defence together to make them understand the benefits of defence and some of the great examples that gives them, from courage to commitment to dedication, drive, and indeed become a net contributor to society. Fully support.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Is the government doing any forward thinking about what will happen when... No, I'm being serious. About what will happen when the shooting stops with a ceasefire agreement in Ukraine? Wherever the border between free and occupied Ukraine finally forms will become the new front line for Europe. So what provision are we making even now to be able to secure the future shape and safety of Europe?
Despite the titters on his own side, the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a really important point. At the point at which Ukraine decides to talk instead, or as well as fight, security guarantees will need to be in place to ensure that Russia does not resume its aggression. The NATO allies have made, back in Washington last year, a commitment that Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership. But there will be a period where during the talks, just in the fight, they will require our support, and we're giving that detailed discussion now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Thursday, my honourable and gallant friend, the Veterans Minister, came to my constituency for an important discussion on veteran mental health. Can I ask him for his reflections on that discussion and what actions he will be taking moving forward?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank my honourable friend for hosting what was a fantastic get-together with veterans, bereaved families, and also the charitable sector. I learned a huge amount from the visit. I looked again at how councils are delivering support of veterans, which I can contrast and compare with other visits, and will come out with a plan in due course.
Gavin Robinson.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State will have heard the exchanges earlier about the grave injustice and the slur that was delivered upon SAS personnel following the incidents in Cluno in the judgment of the coroner last week. Can I ask the Secretary of State to take this opportunity to indicate not only to the House but to service personnel and the nation that he, as Defence Secretary, supports those who bravely served in Northern Ireland and stood in the precipice between peace and tyranny?
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to accept the Right Honourable Gentleman's invitation to do just that, and it beholds us all to remember that those who served in our forces in Northern Ireland were part of a campaign that led to more deaths of UK security personnel in Northern Ireland than in Afghanistan. They deserve and they will have our fullest support.
Kevin Bonnevet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As seems to be the consensus of this House, our support for Ukraine must remain unwavering in the face of Putin's war of national aggression. I'm proud that this country retrofits Storm Shadow missiles in my constituency of Stevenage. But with an increasingly unstable geopolitical situation, would the Secretary of State agree with me that full cooperation with our NATO allies to defend Ukraine and guarantee the security of Europe continues to be integral in the defence of our own country?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend points to one of the major items for discussion on Wednesday at the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, and one of the main concerns in NATO and the new General Secretary General, which is to boost the capacity of the European defence industry.
Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The SDW seismic array in my constituency monitors compliance with the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. At the moment, there is a restriction on wind farm development within the vicinity of the array, but wind farm developers are lobbying hard to have those restrictions relaxed. Can ministers give a guarantee that they won't be relaxed if there is any suggestion that that would interfere with the array's effectiveness?
Well, thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I was dealing with this issue before I came to the House early on today. Supporting our national security is the #1 priority of this government. We need to keep our nation safe. There's a variety of means that we do so, and the array is an important contributor. I'll be very happy meeting him to discuss the details of the issue he's raised.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister pointed out earlier, the RFA have taken a prominent role in protecting our subsea infrastructure. I welcome the settlement of the RFA pay dispute. Will this help the Minister tackle the recruitment and retention crisis that saw numbers of RFA seafarers fall by 30% under the last government?
Well, can I thank the honourable lady for her question? It is absolutely vital that we value the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, something that we have done with settling the pay dispute and being very clear that there is a bright future for seafarers in the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. Their work on RFA with RFA Proteus or the Yantar is an exceptional work, but each and every single day the RFA seafarers are supporting our Royal Navy on global operations. They have our support as a ministerial team, and I'm sure they have the support of both sides of this House.
Matthews.
Russians using drones to drop CS gas into the trenches of the Donbass, and Avon Protection in my constituency ready to manufacture the residue of the 300,000 gas masks that Ukraine requested. Will the government put an order in as soon as possible, please? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, we have taken many steps to try and improve the capabilities of the Ukrainians when it comes to drone technology, and I'm perfectly happy to look at the point that he's raised.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Portsmouth is the home of the Royal Navy, but it's also proudly the home to many companies in the defence sector, BAE, Airbus, Accuracy International, to name a few. They provide fantastic job opportunities for my constituents, but they've been faced with some real difficulties in the last decade. What steps has the department taken to provide support for our defence sector in the UK and Portsmouth, both as businesses and in recruiting and training the much skilled workforce as part of our government's industrial strategy?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the question. I'm hoping and looking forward to meeting her shortly when I visit some of those businesses in her constituency. The Defence Industrial Strategy is the way in which we will seek to deal with the issues that she raised.
Max Wilkinson.
Speaker, my constituent Owen was medically discharged from the Army after 17 years of service. Since then, he's been waiting 2 years for a resolution to his claim under the Armed Forces Compensation Scheme. Do ministers agree with me that's too long to make a veteran wait, and what advice can they give me to resolve his case?
So this absolutely is a government that supports veterans. If you can send me that case, I'll get after it. We pay out over £1 billion in compensation. I've been up to Norcross to ensure best standards up there, but I'll look into your case personally if you send it to me.
Lawrence Tan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital in my constituency, which has an outstanding veterans care service. Does the Minister agree that it is essential that ex and current service personnel in Birmingham and beyond continue to have access to specialised musculoskeletal rehabilitation services?
Absolutely. In Birmingham, there's a whole cluster of fantastic hospital and medical care facilities, and we have the Centre for Defence Medical Science there as well. So absolutely, we'd love to visit, and we can do that in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I'm right in saying that I am the only member of the Commons, if not Parliament, to have Mauritian heritage. And if I'm wrong on that, I will be happily corrected. Why doesn't the Secretary of State see that the proposed deal between the United Kingdom and Mauritius is a dangerous one because of the increase of China's access to the islands near Diego Garcia, an unaffordable one, whether it's £9 billion, £18 billion or £52 billion, money which should go to our armed forces, and above all, a humiliating one in the eyes of the Mauritians, the Americans and the international community? And why won't he scrap it?
The deal with the Mauritians is designed to secure the long-term operation and the legal base and guarantee our ability and our allies in the US to continue to operate from Diego Garcia for at least the next century.
Richard Ford, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier in topical questions, the Veterans Minister said that the Strategic Defence Review will be published in the next couple of months. Can he confirm that it will be published by the end of April?
For correction, I said a couple of months and then in the spring.
That completes questions. Let the front bench change over.